So funny story. My wife's name is Jenny, and there's so many songs about Jimmy or Jenny, right? Like I just registered for this webinar because for some reason it doesn't recognize me, and I always put in who referred you, and I say Jenny, and they say what's the phone number? I say 867-5309. That's an '80s reference. You guys are all too young for it, but the other thing. So my wife and I are big Killers fans. Taylor and I, and his wife and my wife, we travel, and we know the band pretty well. And every time Jenny is a friend of mine comes on, my wife goes nuts because she believes it was written for her. And then Jimmy's got Return of the Mac, which is awesome. I don't have a song after me. But anyways, Jimmy, thanks for joining us. You guys know Jimmy. He's got the best teeth in the business. He's got the best beard in the business. He for sure has the best hair in the business. Jimmy spoke at I think a Tom Ferry summit. You remember that, Amy? And he looked like Tim Cook and Steve Jobs and Elon Musk all rolled into one. It was like the greatest. Jimmy, who picked your outfit that day? Because I've never seen a guy's outfit cause such a stir.
That was a big risk for me because it was the first time I wore leather elbow pads. So when you're gonna speak in front of 6,000 people, you gotta bring something. So no,
that jacket was like longer too. It was
oh dude, it was awesome.
It was like so cool.
Well,
yeah, it was like Zoolander meets Tom Brady. It was everything.
I appreciate that. No, listen, it's great to be here. I see some familiar faces. What's up, Josh? Good to see you on the call, my friend. I think I love what you guys are doing here. As Joe and Amy and I have known each other for forever. As long as I've been in this industry, basically. And anytime I have an opportunity to sit down and have a conversation, share some of the learnings, some of the advice, some of the insights I've been gaining, whether it's in person or on the road, I'm always happy to do so. So, happy to dive in and give back into this community.
Okay, so before we get going with Jimmy, guys, I want to hear your biggest win of 2024. We're 33 days in, 34 days in. What's today's date? The 5th? 36 days into 2024. So just pop in the chat. What's been your biggest victory so far? I've got some ideas of my own, but I'm curious to hear yours. I want to share with you guys something I heard on a podcast. Believe it or not, I actually listened to a golf podcast. Take it for what it's worth. And yeah, shocking. Anthony, there's a podcast you got to listen to. It's called 18 Strong. It's great. Anyways, the lesson was from a mental toughness coach. And he talked about stress. He talked about like the hormones we release when we're under stress and they're toxins to our bodies. And anyways, he said to go through this exercise. It was in golf, but it was really in life. And it was whenever you look at the past, look at the 3 things you did right, the one thing that could have gone better, and the one thing you plan on doing to improve on that one thing that could have gone better. So my son, I had the opportunity to do this Saturday. I caddied for my son in a golf tournament. He took 3rd place out of 12, which, is good, but he's good enough to win. And so he was feeling like crap. We went to Arby's, which if you've ever been to Arby's, horsey sauce is great and Arby's sauce is amazing. And the curly fries, you dip it in the mixture, it's great. And I said, life is food to me, Amy. And I said, Philly, so he's 11. Philly, what are the 3 things you felt like you did really well? And he listed them. And I was like, I agree. I think those 3 things are great. What's one thing you think you could have done better? And he started to go off on, and I was like, no, bud, we only get to pick one thing. Like, what's one thing that could have gone better? And so he picked the one thing. And I said, well, what can we do to make the improvement? And like, just from that one podcast, I got this. And I think I could do it in life, right? Like, as a leader, I can look back on a week and go, all right, what went well? What are 3 things that we crushed this week on our real estate team? What's one thing we could have improved? Well, what's one thing we're going to implement to improve that one thing? Like such a healthy way to be in like problem solving mindset as opposed to releasing like negative hormones into my body because of the stress that I'm under. All right, let's look at some of our wins. Chantal, I have a $3.5 million listing going live this week. Share that with me. Tag me when you post that. I want to see it. Got a listing with a past client. Love it, Patricia. Listing went live Thursday. Have 5 offers coming in on it. The market is back, Ivan. Let's see. Deciding that 2024 is going to be the greatest year of my life. Rob, I love that. If you don't put a buyer into your process, they will put you into theirs. That's awesome. So Josh got that from Sharon. That's great. I mean, it's a great way to think of it. Like if you don't have a process, then buyers are going to put you in their process. And their process includes seeing 37 houses, you buying them Starbucks every day, like you spending a month with them, right? If you don't have a process, they'll create one for you. AI assistants, I love those. I actually hate them. Recruited 3 agents onto its team. Thomas, good job. Attracted top agent into your network. Feel like huge win. Got accepted offer on listing that came out day 1. Locked down a couple of new listings past week. Love it. Money. Is it Lolly? Money Lolly. I like it. Day 37 of 75 hard. Amy, that's awesome. 75 hard is one of the most satisfying things to do. I'll tell you, I've completed it. And then I failed like 4 times since. It's almost one of those things like since I've completed it once, it's so hard to complete it again. I told my wife the first time I did it, I'm like, I will either die or I will finish it. Those are the 2 options. Now I'm just not as committed. Got a listing appointment using LinkedIn. Jason, that's awesome, man. To me, LinkedIn is the most annoying technology on the earth. I'm sure Jimmy can teach me a million things about it. All right, guys, thank you so much. Jimmy, let's talk, man. Jimmy for Amy and I has been equal parts Yoda and Luke Skywalker. Like, he's in the grind, but he's also wise and experienced. I remember Spring and I did our first Momentum Mastermind.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
you remember that. And it was like, Spring and I ended up at Real. We brought 70 agents. She brought 70 agents. And then within like 6 months, we were like, dude, we have like 600 agents in our world. What do we do?
Mm-hmm.
We're like,
Yeah.
well, let's do an event in Vegas. She's like, well, who do we have speak? And I'm like, we got to get Jimmy Mackin to come. And I don't know that you and Spring knew each other at the time. And Jimmy came and crushed it. And everybody was like, everyone that didn't know Jimmy was like, dude, I think that was probably the best speaker I've ever heard. And it wasn't just tactical. It wasn't just practical. It was comical. And I was like, well, Jimmy understands real estate agent humor, right? Like, agents don't, real estate agents we have the stupidest sense of humor of all time. But Jimmy was like, tactical, practical, funny. Tactical, practical, funny. And people were just like, dude, that was amazing. So go ahead, Jimmy.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, this job is hard enough, right? We got to be able to laugh at ourselves a bit when it comes to it. No, I remember that event, and what stands out to me, Nick Bailey from Remax has this great quote that I love so much. I wish I was the one that said it. He says, agents are going from being burnt out to broke. And I think right now we're at this really interesting inflection point where the housing market hasn't crashed. Despite what all the techno NFT YouTubers were predicting all of 2022 and 23, the housing market hasn't crashed, but the number of transactions did. And I'd argue that's actually worse for the agent. Right? It's worse for the agent. So, I think for many agents right now, certainly in this group, we all are looking at 2024 with a lot more optimism and hope. I think we're looking at 24 with a lot more excitement and energy than we have before. And I think we should all have a deep sense of gratitude that we did survive what I would say, I've been in the industry for over 15 years in one way or another. I think this is an example of like we've survived arguably the most difficult kind of period of time, 12-month period of time in the last 15 years. And I would say even during the global financial crisis, it started to kind of be pound for pound, because at least then we knew what was happening. The hard part of 23 and the latter part of 22, it wasn't the fact that the market was heading in a direction. It was my friend David Childers from KCM talks about this a lot. It was the volatility and the uncertainty that made it so difficult to plan and so difficult to strategize. If things are going down, you know what the playbook is. If things are going up, you know what the playbook is. If you don't know which way is north, then developing a playbook becomes that much harder. So just some quick observations there, Joe. And I guess for today's session, I know we got a couple things we want to share with the group here, but I don't know about this group. I think there is a ton of optimism going into 24. And I certainly see that in the rooms I'm in and the conversations I'm having with agents today.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And if that resonates with you guys, if you were in the market in 06, 07, 08, 09, and you were in the market last year, Taylor and I weren't Taylor, right? So in 2006, 7, and 8, like, we were still Dorothy. and we were still in Kansas. And like, we were just practitioners. We made it through. I would love to be in a market like 07, 08, 09. Now we would just like our investment business, like we would crush it. We made it through that. Now, last year, full disclosure for Taylor and I, was a great year financially. Our investment business did really well. Like, it was the best financial year we had. However, our team transaction count was way down.
Yeah.
2023, mid 22 to full 23 was significantly more challenging than 07, 08, 09. And I'm a survivor of both, because to your point, 07, 08, 09, it was a constant downward trend. But like you said, you could plan for it. You could play for it. There was so much opportunity. The challenge of the last 18 months, we weren't there. You couldn't see the opportunity. In 07, 08, 09, everyone knew what the opportunity was. It was just, how do I capitalize on it? How do I get REO accounts? How do I get short sales going? How do I get a large amount of money to buy some investment properties? You knew what you had to do. In a sense, you knew which team you had to be on. You just had to figure out how to put the uniform on. In the last 18 months, it was like, I don't know what to do. Because that stagnant nature of the market. Well, moving into 24, Jimmy, I was like, bro, let's talk about it. Let's boil it down to three things. If there's three things that Jimmy sees, because to be honest, I'm a little bit forest through the trees guy, because I'm in I run a team. I'm in the practice of real estate.
Yeah.
Somebody like Jimmy sits above the trees. He sees what we're doing. He sees what other companies are doing, what other agents, what other teams, what other markets are doing. So he's got more of a 30,000 foot view of the whole landscape. So Jimmy, let's talk about three things that you think in 2024 agents can do to capitalize on this now more active, more robust, hopefully interest rate positive market.
Well, let's start with a story that our tweet I saw recently that really resonated with me. If you're not following a guy by the name of Jason Fried, and maybe Joe can find his Twitter handle, it's just at Jason Fried on Twitter. He's one of the co-founders of a company called Basecamp. Basecamp is this project management software. They build a ton of products, ton of software products at the time, but they're best known for writing books. They wrote the book called Rework, which is trying to reimagine what work is. They wrote a book called Remote, which is getting away from the kind of concentrated in office and moving towards the sort of hybrid business model or remote business model. This was even pre-pandemic. They wrote a book called It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work. And they're a company that I look to because I'm always looking for inspiration outside of real estate to inspire kind of how I think about this industry. They're a company I look at, which is wildly profitable, wildly successful, very small, very efficient. And I think if I were to create the perfect business model, it would be not a huge team, a small team that generates a ton of revenue and a ton of profit. Not a oversized, bloated team that has a million different people, has maybe a lot of revenue, but basically no profit. I think we're all in the business of actually making a profit. That's the point of actually being in the business.
Let me ask you this really quick, Jimmy, get your take on it. So Taylor and I had Ben Kinney on our podcast, and I just put Jason Fried's Twitter handle in the chat. He said the challenge with real estate teams, he compared it to football. And he said, on a football team, you get 11 players. So you're just going to put the best 11 players you can find on the field. He said in real estate teams, it's unlimited. So it's hard because you're not just selecting the best 11 team members. You're like, well, if 5 is good, then 50 is great. And that can sometimes present challenges. Yeah.
It most certainly can. And I'll give you a quick anecdote on that in just a second, but let me just finish this point on Jason Fried. I'll come back to what Ben said in terms of just kind of adding staff and how to sort of orient your team around A players. Cause there's actually a test. There was a test to find out if you've got A players on your team, if you got B players on your team, or if you got C players on your team. And it's a test that because nobody in this room wants to have C players. Some of us are okay having B players. We all want to aspire to have A players. But I want to bring up what Jason Fried said, and he tweeted this recently. Oftentimes when you look at the market, if you're a solo agent on today's call or part of a small team, and let's say you're not the number one agent, you tend to look at these other businesses, top agents in your market who have more resources, more people, more staff, been in the business longer, sold more houses. You look at all the advantages they have, and you see their ads everywhere, and it seems like they're selling every house. What you don't see is you don't see the disadvantages they have. Meaning, as an organization grows, it becomes more bloated, it becomes more bureaucratic. I mean, they have more meetings about meetings. They're slow to make decisions. They're not nimble. They tend to kind of rest on what was working before and not really innovate. And so what Jason coaches people on as a business leader is to look at your perceived disadvantages, being small, being in this case not the number one player, and turn it into an advantage. So if they're big, you may be small, but if they're also slow, which makes you fast, they're bureaucratic, which makes you nimble. And this mindset of like taking a disadvantage and turning it into an advantage is I think the first thing that we have to do from a strategy perspective. And I'll give you a very tactical thing that everyone here should do. It's something that Sharran coaches that I believe in fully, which is everybody is complaining about low inventory in their market. Despite the fact that inventory is up, I don't know, double what it was in 21, we still are in this kind of historically low inventory market. Okay, well, that is a perceived disadvantage. What you should do with that is then recognize that scarcity creates opportunity. So the number one thing I would be doing in this situation right now, and maybe we got some examples that we can share, Joe, but like if there isn't a lot of inventory, that means that inventory is more valuable than ever before, which means we should lean into that and use that to capture more attention, start more conversations, book more appointments. So when you hear a strategy like the deal of the week strategy, which actually, just by a show of hands, for those of you who currently right now are got their cameras on, which is about a handful of us, how many of you are currently executing the deal of the week strategy that Sharran coaches? Oh, we got Amy. We got, what's up, Anthony? We got Matt. Okay, so about 5 to 7 of the people who have their cameras on right now. Now let me take it one step further. So Joe, the idea is like Jason's saying, take a disadvantage, turn it into an advantage. Well, if there isn't a lot of inventory, creating a deal of the week campaign is a great way to start conversations. You can do the Sharran email. That's the basics. That's the blocking and tackling. But if you're really smart, what you would also do is if something works, and this is a pro tip of marketing, if something works, you extend that idea across multiple channels. So if I do a deal of the week email, and keep your hands up for me, all the people who are doing the deal of the week email, are you doing a deal of the week Instagram poll? Same idea, right? And then have, yeah, thanks, Anthony. I realize we have emojis where you can raise your hands, right? So you don't have to actually keep your hands up the entire time there. So just add the emoji. You should do a deal of the week Instagram poll, which is, hey, just came across a great deal in this neighborhood, in this price range. Do you want me to DM you all the details? Yes, absolutely. Or no, I'm not actively looking to buy. Then you could also, if you've done now the deal of the week email, you can then do the deal of the week Instagram post. And then you should also do the deal of the week SOI text. Hey, Amy, I know it's been a little while since we reached out. I know you're not actively looking to make a move, but I just came across a great deal that I wanted to put on your radar. Do you got anybody in your network who's thinking about making a move that we should share this with? And so all of a sudden, this deal of the week email that is just one email that we send out to our database, all of a sudden just became an Instagram post or a poll, which then allows me to have more conversations. Then just becomes a text message that I can use to stay in touch with my SOI. And so when I think about these like perceived disadvantages, Joe, like waiting for inventory to come, no, take the inventory we have today, repackage it through the lens of scarcity, execute Sharran's deal of the week, but then don't just stop there. Don't just send it to your database, turn the corner with an IG post or poll, and then turn the corner texting 4 to 5 of the people within your SOI. And all we're doing right now with these strategies is one thing. And I mean, we'll share this in number 2 here, but the one thing we're doing here, Joe, is like focusing in on having real estate related conversations. And whoever's having the most conversations about real estate is going to win in this market. So that would be my first bit of advice is the deal of the week being a very tactical one, but like disadvantages into advantages, have that right mindset, if you will.
So I'm sure you've read this before, Jimmy, but as you were talking, I put in the chat the Amazon link to David and Goliath by Malcolm Gladwell. And that book to me was crazy, right? Because The narrative around, now this is a Bible story, but the narrative around David versus Goliath is always David's the underdog, Goliath is the favorite. But in
Yeah.
reality, Malcolm Gladwell, not to give away the book, but he just basically says, like, David had artillery, and in order for Goliath to win, he had to get David within arm's reach, and David just sat there and threw rocks at him. And so David was favored. And so, like, to your point, if you're if you think, if you're smart, you can turn the market into your advantage by using things like the deal of the day emails. Great.
Yeah.
But then to your point, it's like, oh, well, if that's good, imagine how good a deal of the week text would be. And if that's good, imagine how good a deal of the day or of the week Instagram post would be. And so it's like, if throwing one rock is good, we'll figure out how to start throwing rocks over and over and over again. And all of a sudden, you, the David, can defeat this massive Goliath. And I think that, long story short, on number one, Jimmy, that's what the people who are crushing it are doing, is they're going, how can I turn what is a perceived disadvantage into a strategic advantage?
One of my favorite entrepreneurs, if you read about him, you can't help but fall in love with his grit and his tenacity, is Sam Walton. And he talked about this idea, being the founder of Walmart. He's like, hey, we found out what worked, and then we just didn't stop doing it. And I think, and this is what you realize, like with a strategy that Sharon and I both love, the Deal of the Week campaign, we know it works, so don't stop doing it. But then also look for opportunities to expand it through other channels in which you can reach consumers. Now, let me circle back to Ben Kinney for a second. Ben's 100% spot on. Because there is no limit to the amount of people you can add, you can build these large organizations, and one day you wake up and you're like, how the hell did I get here? Right? Like who are all these people? I remember we used to host a conference, Curator Excellence, before the pandemic, and we were in, I don't know, maybe it was Austin or Nashville, and we had at the time like 60 something employees, 65 employees, and we were walking over to an event, and I was sitting there in the back with my partner at the time, and we were looking at all of these people, like the 60 people walking towards this event, and I'm like, how, like, who the hell are all these people? Like, how do we hire all these people? I'm like, can we afford to pay these people? I'm like, it was just the first, because we're remote companies, the first time seeing them all together. And so to Ben's point, here's a test on whether you have A players, B players, or C players. If you can imagine a world, very simply, you can imagine a world where this person walks into your office and they say, hey, Anthony, I'm just letting you know today's my last day, I'm quitting. And I want you to pay attention to your emotion. If you imagine that scenario, they walk into your office, hey, Anthony, I'm quitting. What is your instantaneous reaction? Is it thank God? Okay, now you know you've got a C player. Like, now, if this is like, if your first reaction is relief, you've got a C player. If that person walks into the room and they say, hey, Joe, I'm quitting, and your reaction is like, man, it's gonna be a pain, right? Like, all right, like, not great. This is inconvenient, but we can figure it out. Like, if your response is we can figure it out, that means you've got a B player. If they walk into the room and they say, Joe, I'm quitting, and you have the only reaction you have is panic, then you know you've got an A player. And I think right now, most of us, if we're being honest about the teams that we're building, we probably have a lot more B's and C's than we do A's. And I think for me, that's the one thing that I've learned, having been the CEO now for 4 years, is you gotta be honest with yourself around that. I mean, like, A players aren't just 10% better than B players, 20% better than B players. I mean, they are an order of magnitude better. And I think this is the thing that's like that people don't really understand. If you go to let's take a fast food restaurants, right, as an example, there's varying degrees of good to bad, or like they're all bad, but like there's varying degrees of like awful to like, okay, that was good. It doesn't taste great, but not good for you. That's kind of like true for everything in life. When it comes to people, that's not true. Like, some people are just so insanely important to your success. And those people you cannot overpay those people. It is impossible to overpay those people. It's the reason why Apple acquired Steve Jobs' company for Next for like $500 million. They acquired Steve Jobs for $500 million. They didn't acquire his crappy company Next. So I think that would be my like yes and to what Ben is saying, is that if you have these organizations that are starting to become pretty staff heavy or people heavy, you should take an opportunity to take inventory and be honest about it, and not put yourself in the position where you're just kind of surrounding yourself with B's and C's, because again, it is. And you put a lot of extra pressure and stress on yourself. You'd rather just do it yourself than have a bunch of B's and C's, Joe.
So do you proactively, because we had we had an agent send an email on Friday, like, hey man, I like thanks for everything. Like I'm going to another brokerage. And my response was like, best of luck, man. Hope everything's well. It was even worse than a C. It was like a D. It was like, thank goodness. Like it was maybe an F, like F and go, right? So do you proactively recommend for over bloated organizations to go like, all right, man, I know that these people are C, D, and F people. Like, do you proactively move those people out? Because I notice we do a leadership meeting every Monday. And if I looked at our leadership meeting, I would say a solid 30%, if not more, of that meeting is spent discussing the challenges, issues, and problems caused by C, D, and F players. And it's like, why are we even talking about this? This doesn't make us money. We're not talking about how to increase the productivity of an A and make them happier. We're not even talking about how to service the needs of a B. We're talking about the problems created by a C or D.
Yeah.
And it would seem like we'd be better off just going like, hey guys, thanks for all your time. Happy trails.
I have a rule at Curator, which is we don't debate whether water is wet. And so sometimes you get into meetings where people have a tendency to debate things for the sake of debating things, or have, complain about issues or things to resolve. And like, it's the old Patty McCord, who is the chief people person of Netflix, had such a great line that I use ad nauseum at Curator, which is that, she was employing lots of very highly paid people to work at Netflix. I mean, Netflix pays extraordinarily well. And she's she's HR. And what is the role of HR if not to have people come and complain, right? That's kind of the why HR exists. And so people would walk into her office and they'd complain about X or Y or Z. And, usually their manager, usually the project, usually not getting enough credit or not having enough things to work on, whatever it was. And that she'd give them a few minutes to vent. And then she'd say to them very directly, problem finders are cheap. At Netflix, we pay problem solvers. And if you can't solve your problems and that's not your mindset, then here's a great severance. Let's move you out. I think for all of us, none of us have any room in our lives for problem finders. I mean, like so my advice directly, Joe, would be like, yes, if I was a chief or CEO of your business and I had a bunch of people who are just causing problems, I would fire them immediately. It would be a very simple, because here's the problem. You say, Jimmy, well, we're making a little bit of money off them. They don't really cost me anything. What they cost you is all of your talent you want to keep looks at those bozos and says, oh, that's your bar. So that's what you're going to tolerate. And I think for me, the little bit of revenue I generate off of these individuals who are problem finders, who are more of a pain in the ass than anything else, is not worth the damage of my reputation and the opportunity cost that comes with it. So yeah, I think I know it sounds harsh, but quite honestly, I think we do people a huge disservice by like letting them linger around.
So we think, here's the fun part, and Jimmy, I know that you know this better than I do. We think we have goals, standards, and what we're willing to accept. Yeah. But the reality is, if we have something we're willing to accept, we no longer have standards if our acceptance lies below our standards. So it's like this: conversations are everything to us. And so we're like, hey, what's your goal conversation per day? And I have a firmly, and for you guys have seen me do this training, the number of conversations you average on a daily basis will be the number of transactions you average on an annual basis. There's not going to be a varying degree very much. So if your goal is 20 and our team standard in order to be on our team is 10, and you routinely end up at 5, we do not have a standard of 10. We have a
Yeah.
standard of, or, we have a standard of 5. And that's so true, because it's like, what damage are we doing to A players by watching us accept C standard?
Yeah.
We think we have B standard, but our standard is whatever we're willing to accept. Jimmy, why did it take me 15 years to understand that?
Most mistakes, when you ask most successful people, hey, knowing what you know now, what would you have done differently? They were like, get to the right answers faster is almost always is always what they say. You begin to trust your gut a little bit more as you get a little bit more experience. People tend to avoid like uncomfortable conversations. I think one of the things I learned. I'm 38 years old right now. When I started my company, I was 26 years old. And one of the very bad habits I had early on is I had a deep desire to be liked by my employees. Because first off, many of them were like my age or older, and I wanted them to I figured like, hey, I want them to like me. That would be something that was important to me. And there's no worse quality in a leader than a desire to be liked.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, that is something that I think I've had to learn. And I think here's the advice for the solo practitioners on the call, the solo agents on the call, is that the people you surround yourself aren't just the people in your organization. It's also the type of Zoom calls you're on, the type of agents you're interacting with on social media, the Facebook groups that you subscribe to, the masterminds that you attend. So like, get yourself in the best room always is really an important thing, and start trying to punch above your weight class. And Brian Chesky from Airbnb said it best. Brian Chesky, who I think is, to me, one of the most impressive young CEOs in technology, in business right now. And he talks about this idea of like, all he spends his time on now, he's like, I'm always a rookie, because every time I reach a certain level, I've now reached a level I've never been at before, and it's all brand new to me. So what he does, he spends a lot of his time trying to find who are the best people in the field that he wants to surround himself with, so he can accelerate his learning. And so if you're the solo practitioners on the call right now, it's like, if you're not on a team, or you don't have, if you're not building a team, it's okay. Like, surround yourself with the smartest people you can, and keep pushing yourself to do that, because there's a big unlock when you get to that point, Joe.
Let me run this by you, Jimmy, before we move on to number 2, because Jimmy's like an entrepreneurial scale. What I mean by that is, like, when you step on a scale, it just tells you what it is. I like to run theories by Jimmy, because he'll go, yeah. So think about this, Jimmy. Think about guilt from a real estate team perspective, right? And I talked to this. We have a book club for our leadership group on our team, and we were talking about this on Thursday or whatever it was. We team leaders focus on the wrong guilt. And what I mean by this is, often you'll hear people in leadership of self-employed individuals, right? Like, when you look at a real estate team, unless you're paying people a salary, the guilt that real estate team leaders live with is, well, I'm not paying these people's salary. They're still independent contractors, so I can't ask too much of them. And the thought I shared with my team the other day is, okay, cool. I'm okay with you having guilt. That's just the wrong guilt to have. The guilt that you should have when you're leading a self-employed individual, when you're leading an independent contractor, is the guilt associated with their failure. You're associating guilt with pushing them to work when you're not, like, saying, I'll pay you $25 an hour. That's the wrong guilt. The guilt you should feel is the guilt associated with them not being able to make their mortgage payment. The guilt associated with them having to explain to their spouse why they're going to have to go get a 9-to-5 job. The guilt associated with allowing them to set a goal and fail. Like, if we can transition our guilt with running our team from like, oh, I can't ask them to be here. And this is California is dealing with this as the labor law, right? Can a real estate team call people independent contractors and say, you have to work 9 to 5? So we as real estate practitioners in leadership go like, well, they're not my quote unquote employees, so I can't push them too hard because they're independent contractors. And my theory is, that's the wrong guilt. The guilt you should have is, I can't stomach the thought of allowing somebody, even an independent contractor in my field, to fail, because if I don't push them, they're going to fail. And to me, that should be the guilt that real estate team leaders should be obsessed with, not the I'm not paying your salary, therefore I can't push you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I think the late great Charlie Munger talked about this idea, and he said dumb incentives equals dumb outcomes. And I think right now the challenge we have with real estate, and it's maybe the hardest thing I've observed, because I've never sold real estate. I've never been a real estate agent. I've never been part of a real estate team. And so I have sometimes a very skewed perspective on it that's maybe not tied to reality, but I tend to question things that just don't make sense to me when I hear them. Real estate is a world of delayed gratification. I mean, what you do today is not going to impact your paycheck today. It will impact your paycheck 45 days, 60 days, 90 days, 180 days down the road. That's a really tough thing to deal with. I mean, like in sales in particular, most sales jobs, like there's a cushy salary and you get paid, you hit your goals, and it's sort of this almost immediate gratification or near immediate gratification. And so I think I'm going to change the word guilt to incentives for a second, Joe. Kind of reframe guilt to incentives. What I've always wondered is, why haven't we at the real estate team level addressed the incentive model to optimize for more instant gratification than sort of this delayed gratification? So if we know that calling a lead back in 30 seconds is a much higher likelihood of getting a conversation, and that conversation is a much higher likelihood of becoming an appointment, that appointment is a much higher likelihood of becoming a customer. If we know these things to be true, why aren't we getting creative about creating some type of financial system around incentivizing the right behaviors that lead to the outcomes that will benefit everybody, including the person? And I think I was sitting in a room with 27 of the top agents in the country last week in Dallas. These agents are selling, probably in that room is probably about $10 billion a year in real estate being sold. And it's funny because the problems they were complaining about in terms of like agents not picking up the phone, not doing the things that they want them to do, those have always existed. I mean, whether it's small team or big team, like it feels like we haven't solved the fundamental issue. So if I'll throw a crazy idea out there to you, Joe. If I have a leads team within my organization, or like, let's say I have agents in my organization where like everyone's driven, I would set aside cash and I would put it into an escrow account. And I would say, okay, if you like, it's $2,000 a month, right? I say, if you hit all your goals this month in terms of these key metrics that I know drive the outcome, you keep the 2,000. Every time you miss your goal, I deduct from that escrow account. I go from 2,000 to 1,900, 1,900 to 1,500, 1,500 to 1,000. And the reason I would do this is because I would create some incentive model around this idea where they feel like they're doing the things that we want them to do to keep the thing they already have. Because we know that like the fear of losing out on something you already have is such a strong motivator versus like gaining something new. Because like you want to shake them, Joe, and say, hey, like, don't you realize you can make an incredible amount of money in this industry if you just do your job? But if you actually start taking away their money, now all of a sudden, like it changes their mindset and it changes the incentive structure. So I think I would say, before we move on to number 2 here, Joe, I just think there is a huge opportunity to reimagine incentives for our teams to create the behaviors we're looking to try to do. Because I can tell you right now, no amount of accountability meetings appears to be working from my perspective.
Yeah.
I mean, like,
Well,
I've seen it all.
Well, Sharon set up a lunch at the Real conference last year, and a few of us had the opportunity to be there with Layla Hermosi. And she talked about incentive-based motivation and how so much of what we do is punishment-based motivation, and how that's so wrong. So I love what you're saying. Taylor and I are doing an incentive for this year where it's traditionally driven by our real estate sales team. This year we're driving it from our investment team. And basically, if an agent brings us 3 investment deals that we capitalize on, we're taking them to Tahiti And it's
Yeah.
our attempt to say, let's focus on incentive-based motivation as opposed to punishment-based motivation. Because I find even myself as a father, I do that, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm so quick to take away a phone. I'm so quick to if I say you're gonna have punishment, I will issue the punishment. But Layla kind of got my mind thinking more around incentives. All right, Jimmy, we got 15 minutes left. So
Yes.
let's get to number 2, because you and I could just riff back and forth forever.
Yeah. So number one, we talked about this idea of using the like very tactical stuff, deal of the week, extending that to IG, extending that to text message. I cannot oversell that. That is just one very simple, repeatable, scalable way to get your team in motion, having conversations with your email list, with your following on social media, and with your SOI. Number 2 on the list. Tom Ferry and I partnered up last year in Q4 to do a program called 100K in 100 Days. And to my knowledge, it is the largest listing attraction experiment in history. We got 2,400 agents to opt into the program. Those agents, we gave them a playbook to execute. In the 100 days, those agents generated 18,000 transactions, like closings, not just appointments, 18,000 transactions, which equated to about $7.5 billion in volume. And the one thing that we learned in that sort of massive experiment that we launched was the North Star metric, and Joe mentioned this already, alluded to it. The North Star metric is the way to ensure you don't get confused and you don't get overwhelmed, which is very easy to do in real estate, which is with our research, it was 11 real estate conversations equaled a customer. So if you have a conversation with 11 people, one of those people will become a customer, a buyer or a seller. Now, what I want you to do is I want to stretch your thinking just a bit on this, because when it comes to conversations, we tend to think about prospecting, circle dialing, calling FSBOs, calling expires, things of that nature, or like dialing for dollars on our database with our internet leads. There are other ways in which you could have conversations, or other ways in which you can create conversations. For me, when you log into Facebook, on the right-hand side, you have these little green dots that tell you and show you whether people are online within your network. To me, that's a cheat code. If you're not sending 4 to 5 Facebook messages per day to people who are currently online, starting a conversation, trying to deliver some version of value based on what you know about them, whether it's offering a free equity value update on their home, whether it's sharing a deal of the week, whether it's passing along relevant real estate related information that you know is impactful for them. I mean, that is one way that like I see those green dots, and that just equals money for me. So instead of just like working the cold internet leads you have in your database, which can become customers, instead of starting there, I'm starting with my SOI. I'm starting with people who I'm connected to on social media, people who are logged into Facebook. I'm starting with people who are interacting and interfacing with my polls or my stories on Instagram. I am sliding into the DM. I am texting people. I'm working like those sort of VIPs, if you will, like every single day, because in my mind, I'm saying I've got to be creative and smart about having conversations, because 11 conversations equals one customer. So this is the way I would be thinking. If number 2 on my list is make sure that you have your North Star metric, which should be conversations, and make sure you're thinking creatively about ways in which you can start more conversations, not just with calling, but also with texting, with DMing, with getting people to engage you through social media, and always have this approach. And I think this is the simplest way to do it is, and it's so easy. It is, don't ask for permission to be helpful. Just try to be helpful. So it's value first, not permission first. And I think this is a mistake everybody makes, which is they say, "Hey, Joe, I just saw that, saw something happen in your life. Anything I can help you with today?" I mean, like, it puts all the pressure on you, Joe, to make the decision on how I can be helpful, as opposed to like doing something that's actually helpful. Let me give you one small example of this. If you're not doing 3 to 5 unsolicited CMAs per day, I mean, you're missing out. It's just such a simple, I'm sorry, 3 to 5 per week. 3 to 5 per day is too much. If you're not doing 3 to 5,
per day, be a lot.
It'd be a lot. 3 to 5 per week, unsolicited CMAs. I mean, like, you're just missing out on like the low hanging fruit. So number 2 on the list, Joe, is that after getting 2,000 agents to generate 17,000 transactions worth $7.5 billion in transaction volume in what would be the worst quarter in recent memory, the one learning we had is conversations equals closings. And so it should be your North Star metric. And you should say, you should have your priority list. Like, is the thing I'm doing right now going to create conversations? If the answer is no, move it to the bottom of the list. That would be my guidance for number 2, Joe.
So I'm a big visualization guy. And one of the things I loved, I wasn't a huge Mr. Rogers neighborhood. I think I kind of missed it. But I do know that when Mr. Rogers walked in his house, he took off whatever he had, he put on his cardigan sweater, he buttoned it, and he went on with his day, right? Like one of my favorite speakers, it's more of on the spiritual sense, but a guy named Jeffrey Holland says, we already know which team is going to win. We just have to decide which jersey we're going to wear. And there's almost this visualization mentality of walking into the office, putting on I'm going to have my conversations today jersey and deciding to be on that winning team. And it is very, like to your point, it is very much as simple as saying, if I don't have my conversations today, I'm deciding to put on the loser's jersey, not to say you're a loser, but you're just on the losing side of that day. And it's almost like so easy to say, whether it's your home office or whatever, you walk through the doors of your office, you put on your jersey. I'm going to have those conversations today. I'm putting on my cardigan sweater. I'm going to win. You have those conversations. And Jimmy, let me ask you this, like straight to the point. How confident are you that if an agent has their conversations, regardless of ability to conversate, if they just simply create those conversations, how confident are you that they're going to win and hit their goals?
I tweeted this recently, Joe. I said mediocre agents who are fanatically prospecting will beat great agents who are waiting for the phone to ring. And I think that is, I think the challenge for those of us who have been, let's say, selling real estate for a long time. I mean, the challenge is like we're like, man, at what point does like momentum kick into effect, right? Like at what point does my phone just start ringing? Like, how long do I sell real estate for? People just call me up. And there's a woman you should all follow. She's like my, I mean, like if I could only subscribe to one person on X, this would be the person. If I could only read one person's newsletter, this would be the person. Her name is Dr. Julie Gerner. And Joe will hopefully grab it and drop it in the chat for us on X. Dr. Julie Gerner. She's a performance coach out of New York City. She works with top executives from major organizations. And she's a psychologist who understands how to drive peak performance. And she has this great line. She says, there is no such thing as momentum. You are the wind. And so for me, I have this sort of like, I think this is just true, Joe. Like you have got to, I mean, like good agents who are waiting for the phone to ring. I mean, like that's the one thing you can't do in 24 is wait. You can't wait for interest rates to drop. You can't wait for inflation to come down. You can't wait for inventory to go. Like you have got to get on your horse. And if you've listened to me, follow me, hear me speak, watch my videos, see me on X, like you see, that's something I really push people towards. Like, let's get you in motion. It's the great JD Rockefeller quote, which is action solves everything. And I think that is the one thing I'm observing of really successful agents, Joe, is like they are always in action. So yeah, that's just my take on it. I know we have like 9 minutes or now 8 minutes.
Yeah. What's number 3?
Number 3. And hopefully this is valuable. I know Joe and I are just ranting about the industry. We appreciate everyone jumping on with us today.
Well, I think there's so much to learn from listening to smart person, I'll say, but I think I'm reasonably smart. Listening to smart people rant, you'll learn so much. Like Amy and I had lunch with Ben Kenny at the Real Conference. And there was no agenda. We were just chatting. And it was like, dude, I wish all of our friends, like all the people on this call would have just heard Ben's answers to our like ranting conversations, because it's like, you know, it's one thing to go like, you know, A, B, C, D, E, F, right? Like, but listening to smart people just talk, there's so much value to be had there. But go ahead, give us.
So number 1, disadvantage to advantage. That's the deal of the week. Don't just send the email, do the Instagram poll. Don't just do the Instagram poll. send the SOI text, right? That's number one. Number two is make sure your North Star metric is conversations. But then number two is to expand your thinking on what conversations mean. Don't just think about it in terms of prospecting, dialing for dollars, circle dialing, expires FISBOs. It's DMs on Instagram. It's sending messages to people on Facebook when the green light is lit up. It's text messages to your SOI. It's drop bys. It's all like there are many ways to have conversations. Don't get just stuck in being a sort of one trick pony, if you will. Number three is something that I am very passionate about, which is I shared this recently on Facebook. I said, good markets create bad habits. And by the way, most of what I share is like I'm like a reminder for myself, not so much like trying to pontificate, but I'm like I just have to remind myself. Like I say things to myself, I'm like as a reminder to myself not to make that mistake, or sort of like it's like I'm giving advice to myself like 95% of the time in this case. And good markets create bad habits. In the last 2 years, we had let's say in the previous 3 years, we had a good market. In the last 12 months, we've had a very challenging market, but we still have these bad habits. And what I mean by that is we still have these things that we do or don't do that we sort of fell out of flavor with that we know work. And I'll give you a super tactical one. Farming, direct mail, is how many of the top listing agents in the country build their business. You can build your business on the buy side through lead gen, very effective. You can build your business on the buy side through open houses or being a part of a large team, very effective. Most of the top teams I've interfaced with who generate the vast majority of listings have some version of a farming strategy. I mean, they do direct mail in their area. And one tactic so the first thing is if you're not doing direct mail, like this is a good habit that you probably fell out of flavor during the market when the market was booming. And Amy can share some examples because I know Amy does a lot of direct mail and does the magic letters, and she's got some stories that she can share with this group at later calls. But one thing that I've been seeing work really well is I pioneered this strategy called the ZMA strategy, which is all I do is pull up. Let's say I pull up Joe's a client of mine. I pull up his house on Zillow. I take a screenshot of that house and the Zestimate. And so then I text Joe, hey, Joe, just checking in. I was on Zillow earlier today looking at your property, and they estimate your home is worth, $1.8 million. I include a screenshot of that text message. And then the third text is, I have my opinion, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. That's a ZMA strategy. And I've shared about it. I tweeted about it. If you go to my Instagram, you'll see examples of that. Well, what my friend Connie Carlson's doing, Connie Carlson's taking the ZMA strategy, which is a very effective way to kind of stay in touch with your SOI. And she is now doing the ZMA for her farm. So she's having, I should say, she was doing this. She's created 300 letters, but her poor husband, Dan, is the workhorse here. Dan is basically printing out a like a Zillow page for the home. And they're writing a sticky note on that home that says, would you sell your house for 10% more than this number? Call me or text me at, here's my number. And so they're follow me here for a second. They make a list of homes that they want to farm to. They print out the Zestimate. So like, this case, 300 of these, and they put a sticky note and they just drop it in the mail. And it's like, it takes them, 10 to 20 minutes per day. Since the beginning of the year, they've sent out 300 of them, and they've secured $900,000 in listing appointments from this strategy. I mean, the total cost of this is like Dan's time. And so like, Dan's probably being a little bit more efficient with his time because Connie's put him to work, but like, we're not talking a significant investment. This is definitely something an admin or a VA could do. And so why this strategy is so effective is because it's so deeply personalized to that customer, which I think is one of the big themes. So my third tip here is, if you are really thoughtful about it, you can probably make a list of 3 to 5 things you've done historically in your career that have been so insanely effective that have worked, but you're not doing it. And so if you go down the list and say, Joe, if you and I were to do a thought exercise and say, Joe, make a list for me of 5 things you've done in the past that are working today, and then make another list of the things that have worked in the past that you're no longer doing. Okay. That's your strategy for the next quarter. And so good markets create bad habits. In 24, we've got to flip that. This is not a bad market, but it is an opportunity to develop some of those good habits and get back to doing what we know works.
I love it. Jimmy, this is so valuable. To me, Jimmy, as far as thought leaders in real estate, like Sharon and Jimmy, I mean, it's really hard to beat those guys. I would say number 3 is a guy, Taylor and I years ago, our very first real estate coach was a guy named Craig Proctor. And when I say real estate coach, I mean like we attended his seminars. Jimmy, you know Craig. The thing I love that Craig did is he was like, well, just do what everybody else does, but think about it and do it in a way that no one else is willing to do it. And one of the prime examples was his letters, postcards, and billboards that said, I will sell your house in 30 days or I'll buy it myself. And real estate agents have such a gag reflex to that because they're like, I can't buy $1 million house. How would I possibly, right? The devil's always in the details. And what he buys, he writes up an offer and says, if I don't sell it for $1 million, I'll buy it for 700, whatever. It's all about getting the appointment. But to your point, Jimmy, you're saying like, do what everybody else can do, but just do it. Number 3, like in a super creative way, go back to what worked before. The poison of 2021 and 2022 is the fact that I could go to the gym and stretch and somebody would go like, hey man, how's the market? And I would go, oh, it's crazy. And they would go like, yeah, I'm thinking of selling. And I would go like, okay, cool. I'll come and look at it. That was such a poisonous practice of real estate because it created this thought of like, oh, well, this is really easy. I'll just keep going to the gym. Like you get, right now, people are going to the gym and they're like, dude, I keep stretching and no one's freaking asking me about real estate. So I would almost say, forget about everything from 21 and 22. What were you doing if you were in the industry in 2016? That's probably a really good metric of what you need to do now. And Jimmy, I know we're out of time, but how do people get in touch with you? How do people get a little bit more Jimmy in their life?
Yeah, well, first off, Joe, thank you so much. And I just have to say one thing. There's a woman on Twitter or X. Her name's Cody Sanchez. She talked about this idea, this reality. She talks about like when you look at successful people, you tend to emulate their behavior. But she's like, Jeff Bezos was like 3 shades of melanin, like lighter in the 90s than he is today. He wasn't spending time on yachts in the 90s. He was out there working. So I think what, we tend to, when we're following people who are successful, they'll talk about work-life balance. They'll talk about, all these things that were not true when they were building what they built. So I would just be like, real estate is a job where it is a job that looks easy when you're not the one doing it. This is hard work, and we have a big opportunity as a community to make it a little easier. But like, make no mistake, this is a hard job, and the opportunity ahead of us is obviously a very big one. And I think we're all signing up for that. So if you want to stay connected to me, the best place to get connected to me, send me a DM. Follow me, subscribe to my broadcast channel. I'm on Instagram. It's just at Jimmy Mackin on Instagram. Always happy to contribute back to my friends, Joe and good to see Josh and Anthony and Amy on today's call. I love what you guys are doing with Real. Keep cranking, keep building, keep doing what you got to do because this is going to be an exciting market and there's a lot of opportunity ahead of us.
Love it. Guys, if you want a recording of this,
Thanks,
give us maybe 3 minutes. Adriana is going to change the link. So on my Instagram, there's a picture of Jimmy and I, and we had posted comment below to get the link to join the call. We're actually going to change it to comment below to get a recording of this call. If you guys have team members or friends that were not on this call, this was a masterclass. Jimmy, this was a masterclass in who you need to be and what you need to be doing to crush it in 2024. So give us, Adriana's probably working on it right now, but the autoresponder to this Instagram post, picture of me and Jimmy on my Instagram, is going to be a link to the recording of this call. Take it, share it, study it. It could be a 500s level college course on becoming a real estate practitioner and crushing it in 2024. Jimmy, I'm grateful for you. Amy, any last minute
No, we're
thoughts?
good. No, it's great. We'll be back here again next Monday, guys. 9 Pacific, 12 o'clock Eastern time. Jimmy, this is gold. Thank you.
Okay, guys, thanks.